Okay, thank you for tuning in this evening. I've got a lot to go through, so I'm gonna try to make this under an hour. I think those who have watched the one that we did a couple of weeks ago with the time statements, we had Martin Asare, Jeff Cunningham, and Tristan Gabriel on, and we had a really great discussion. I made some shorts. I've been making some shorts within the last week. Some really great stuff, but it generated a lot of negativity. And so last night, Martin and Jeff they got on another podcast. I'm not going to mention which one, and they ended up trying to clear themselves because they did such a horrible job during the one that we did a couple of weeks ago over here. And so let me go ahead and just quickly share my screen. And I just want to go through some of the points. The reason why I called this Martin Asare's Amillennial Eisegesis is because I've also got a lot of emails that I have that are basically trying to promote an amillennial system, but they're like failing at all of these points are failing at like at every exegetical, citation of scripture, every piece of exegesis that he's doing is like, well, he's not doing exegesis, he's doing eisegesis. And so I wanted to go through some of those points as well. But firstly, let's just go to this short. And I don't have any notes, so forgive me if I'm if I'm just a little bit disorganized. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to play this short first of all. And actually, we're going to play a couple of shorts because I want to show you just some of the horrible eisegesis that underlies Martin's and Jeff's system. And of course, they're amillennialists. So those of you who have seen their stuff before, we've had some of their material over here, in previous months. And for a while there, they weren't really welcome over here because of the rhetoric and because they're just so aggressive and so, I don't want to use the word nasty, but just so they can't agree to disagree. And so one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because they brought it to this level, and because there have been times where I've said, look, maybe we should just agree to disagree. That's fine. I'll stay on my side of the fence, you stay on yours. But they don't want to do that. They want to force their views on everybody else. And then, of course, when you get them in a session like this, where you start asking some difficult questions, well, they can't answer the questions, and the meltdown happens like right away. The whole conversation goes down the drain like almost immediately. So let's play this one first. Let's see. Let's play this one first. This one here is going to be the timing. Let's see. It says Martin Asare fails again. Are the time texts based on God's foreknowledge? Let's play this. I want to ask Martin a question. And then Jeff, you could chime in if you want. Martin, so let me ask you this. I'm just stirring things up. Could the time texts be based on God's foreknowledge?
It always has been based on God's foreknowledge, because God's foreknowledge is based on his decree. Okay, God determined that time
so
he would
he
do
said,
everything. So
okay. Okay, let me follow up now. So if it's based on his foreknowledge, then he said he was coming soon because he knew that Christ was coming soon.
He knew that according to how he defined what soon is, that's when Christ will come.
But he said to the original audience, exactly. See, this is the point that you guys, this is the part you guys are,
and I'm telling you the reason why.
This is the point. You guys are violating every principle of logic, grammar, and common sense.
I'm telling you, bro.
I want to ask Martin a question.
Okay,
and so then, obviously, not a very good response. I mean, foreknowledge. Okay, if the time texts are based on foreknowledge, then we know that God is using those timing statements because he knew that something was going to happen soon. For instance, why would he use near soon statements of imminency. If he was talking about an event that was 2,000 plus years away, he wouldn't do that. He wouldn't use statements of imminency. So if he's talking about something that's soon, that's going to happen within the lifetime of his original audience, then obviously he's going to use statements of imminency. If he's talking about something that's going to happen in 2,000 years, then he's going to use other language, right? And so it was very much an exegetical failure on their part to see where I was headed with that, and to head it off at the pass. Because look, if I was an amillennialist, I would be like, okay, I would frame such an argument as that I would be saying, okay, well, soon might mean soon in God's time, frame of time. And this is actually what they were arguing last night, but they weren't necessarily arguing that a couple of weeks ago. Because see, when you have time, now you got time to make a response. You've got time to cook up a mess of eisegetical word salad, and now you can explain it a little more articulately because you weren't put on the spot. Let's go to another one, and we're going to have 3 clips. I'm going to have 3 clips and I'm going to play tonight. And this one right here, this is another one that was from that same session that we did about the time texts. So you're saying they were in the millennium, and Christ said that he was coming soon quickly. So this passage right here proves, according to your exegesis, this passage right here would prove that the great white throne judgment was like imminent and could have happened in the first century.
Okay, can I answer now? Can I go ahead?
Well, you could answer now, but don't give me another 15-minute monologue.
Okay,
Just answer the question.
Hey,
I
Mike,
would try. Sorry.
judgment is always imminent. Judgment is always
Okay,
imminent.
so it's always, so now I got a counter question now, okay? And I'll let you answer just 1 minute. So
Okay.
could Christ have returned in the first century?
No.
Okay, he could. So basically these are false teachings that you're saying. You're calling prophets, the prophets false teachers. So you're saying they were in the millennium.
This is when he defines and give explanation to the vision. This is what he says. It will cover a period when a little stone will come from heaven as an uncut stone, and it will first bring down the kingdoms of this world, which are made in the image of man versus the image of God. And then it will be established as a kingdom in the period of the same kings. And then as a little stone, it will continue to grow and grow and grow and grow and fill the whole earth at the point when all the kingdoms of this world will be no more. So this means that the period called the last days is the manifestation of the kingdom in its beginning until its fullness. But its fullness is described. Notice the way that the beginning is described. It will dwell with the kings of this world. This is when he defines and gives.
Okay, so the reason why I wanted to play that clip is because he's talking about a little stone, whereas Daniel never mentioned a little stone. He mentioned a stone that came from heaven, a stone cut out without hands that came from heaven and smote the image. Now we're going to look at this passage right now, because I think this is extremely important that we get these words right, because I want to show you that Martin Asare is actually eisegeting this concept of his concepts of amillennialism into the text, into the prophetic text. So whenever he talks about prophecy, whenever he talks about especially Daniel's prophecies, you'll see him like weaving this doctrine of amillennialism into the text. So let me go ahead and share my Bible Hub. Okie doke. Okay, and so we're not going to go through the whole thing, but what I want to say is that this is a very important chapter. In fact, everything in the book of Daniel has a relevance and connection with the book of Revelation. So if you don't believe that, all you have to do is read in Revelation chapter 22, where Jesus said, seal not the words of this prophecy, for the time is at hand. Now, Daniel in the last chapter of the book of Daniel, Daniel was told to seal the vision, right? Because it was yet for many days. And so this idea of this 42 months, which continually repeats itself in the book of Daniel, this period of 42 months is times and a half, is also dealt with in the book of Revelation. And so ultimately what a lot of Amils will do is they'll try to discorrelate the book of Revelation from the book of Daniel. And the reason why they want to do this is because they understand that if the book of Revelation is talking about the same thing as the book of Daniel, the same period of 42 months, then amillennialism is false. It totally demolishes amillennialism, because this 42-month period happens at the time of the end. It happens when the little horn is reigning. He's speaking these great words. He's persecuting the saints. And then after the little horn is destroyed, the kingdom and dominion are given to the saints of the Most High. There's no way around it. You can't massage the text to make it apply to something that happened at Pentecost, or to something that happened during Christ's ministry, or something that was happening anytime prior to the rise of this little horn, this 42 months. So what Martin's doing is he's understanding that the kingdom started small. So he's taking the grain of mustard seed, that amillennial idea, and he's reading it into the text of Daniel chapter 2. So he's thinking, well, because he says, well, the kingdom's happening right now. And so Jesus Christ, of course, he ascended on high, sat down at the right hand of the Father. This happened in AD 30. And so the kingdom's been going on ever since. And so he's going to be looking to fix the establishment of the kingdom during this period. Now, if there was no kind of cataclysm, or if there was no smash up of the world's kingdoms at that time, and say in the first century, Pentecost, or during the Pentecostal dispensation, then what he's got to do is he's got to minimize that smash up. And that's why he's saying that, well, it's a little stone. It's so little that you didn't even know anything about it. But then it grew gradually bigger and bigger and bigger. So he's saying that the little stone started off little, and it hit the image on the foot. I guess it might have been the big toe or little toe. I don't know how he envisions this. But then it grew, the little stone, it grew, and it turned into this huge mountain. And when it finally turned into the huge mountain, that's when the second coming comes. This is amillennial eisegesis. That's not what the text of Daniel chapter 2 says. So I'm not going to read the whole passage, but let me just maximize. And I just want to, here we go. So, okay, so in verse 32, it says this image is, and we've all read the passage before. I'm not going to, go through the background or anything. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, this idea of gradualism doesn't really enter in. Now, okay, so you could say that maybe after the stone smote the image, it took a long time for it to become a great mountain. Maybe it took 1,000 years. Maybe it didn't. Maybe it took 2,000. But it doesn't. The text doesn't say that. It simply said it smote the image and became a great mountain. It doesn't tell how long it took. What it does say, though, what the text says, is that when this stone was cut out, it smote the image upon its feet. and then it break them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together. So what Daniel's saying is he sees these kingdoms in succession. And at the time of the end, when this rock comes, the whole statue is reconstituted, because you have to reconstitute the statue in order to have it standing by the time that the rock comes. And so a lot of say preterists and a lot of amillennialists will do is they'll say, well, it happens in the first century, because that's when this that's when this fifth kingdom or fourth kingdom was in operation. Problem is with that is that was still in its successive stages of development. It hadn't been reconstituted yet. It was still going through, the legs of iron, and then of course the feet of iron and clay. That I think happens. That's going to be in the future. But when the statue is standing, that's when the rock comes, and that's when everything's broken up. So it doesn't matter really how you interpret the passage. There's no mention of a little stone, and there's no mention of this idea of that the stone's just going to, ping the statue on the foot, and then it's gradually going to, all this stuff that Daniel's talking about is going to take place over a period of 2,000 years. It's simply not in the text. And so Martin, what he's doing is he's reading his amillennial kingdom idea into Daniel's text. And so he's talking in verse 42, he talks about the toes being part of iron and part of clay, kingdom being partly strong and partly broken, and that whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, etc. And in the days of these kings, so it's got to be the 10 kings, right? Because the 10 kings are mentioned, we're going to see in just one moment that the 10 toes are parallel with the 10 horns of Daniel's beast and also of John's beast as well. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. So in the days of the kings, and those kings, when those 10 kings arise, in those days, God, the God of heaven, will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all of these kingdoms, and it will stand forever. So, hey, I mean, that's pretty direct, right? I mean, you really can't, if you're going to interpret this according to its grammatical, historical, contextual meaning, you have to discard Martin's idea entirely, because what he's talking about is something that started in the first century during Christ's ministry. And there was no breakup. There was no smash up of the Roman Empire. There was no kings. They can't agree. Commentators can't agree, who hold to the doctrine of preterism. They can't agree who these 10 kings were. They don't know who they are. They don't know if they ever existed or not. And then, of course, with the 10 kings, and you've got one king that comes after that, and then he subdues 3 of those kings. And this is where you have to go to Daniel chapter 7. Let's see. Daniel chapter 7. Now, this whole chapter is important, because this right here is going to tell you when this catastrophe takes place. So the rock hitting the statue on the feet, and everything going to smash. When does this take place? Well, this takes place in the days of those 10 kings. So he's talking about the 4 beasts. 4 great beasts came up from the sea. All right, so the first was like a lion, had eagle's wings. Let's see, verse 5, I beheld another beast, a second like to a bear. And then in verse 6, one like a leopard, right? And then in verse 7, he says, after this I beheld in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before, and it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. Then he says, I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. Fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. Now, this is a dead ringer for Revelation chapters 4 and 5, where you have this this Ancient of Days sitting there on the throne, and then you have all of these ministering angels, and you've got the 24 elders. Very, very, very much a parallel passage. And what's it talking about? What is this judgment scene being set up for? Well, it says in verse 11, it says, I beheld then, because of the voice of the great words which the horn spake, I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and time. And he says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven and came to the Ancient of Days. Again, that's Revelation chapter 5, where Christ comes to the Ancient of Days and he receives that book, right? And they brought him near before him. And there was given him dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. So this is talking about that period of 42 months. It's talking about this judgment scene where this is long past, the day of Pentecost. This is long past, most of what we would call church history. This is that last 42-month period where you have to have the 10 toes first, the 10 kings, but then there's another king that arises after that. He subdues 3 of those 10 kings, and then he becomes the 8th. So remember, 8th of the 7. That's another way of looking at it. You have 7 heads. I don't know if we're going to be able to get into that tonight, but what I'm trying to show you is that all of these prophecies are parallel, and you can't say this was happening on the day of Pentecost. You can't say this was happening during Christ's ministry. This is something which even Jeff and Martin would have to say. This is an end time thing. When the beast and false prophet are cast into the lake of fire, that's when Christ comes. And at that point, that's when the kingdom is given to the saints. But again, let's see. Let's just switch down to verse 23. The fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it to pieces. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. It says, and he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times in the dividing of time. Well, that's 42 months. But the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion, to consume it and destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. So that's pretty straightforward. That's if the 10 horns are parallel with the 10 toes, which is what most expositors will argue, and which even Martin would have to say, these texts, they really are parallel, then this is not something that just happened, that started on the day of Pentecost. This is something that has to be it's a cataclysmic event that has to have taken place either If you're a preterist, AD 70, that's when they say that this happened. If you're a futurist like myself, you're going to say that this is future. But if you're an amillennialist, you really can't hold to a future antichrist and believe that this kingdom began on the day of Pentecost, because it's the antichrist that has to be destroyed first before the kingdom is given to the saints. And that's what Revelation says. Revelation says that in a number of places, says that when the seventh trumpet sounds, the kingdoms of the world are become the kingdoms of our Lord and of his Christ, and he shall reign forever and ever. So the kingdoms don't become Jesus Christ's until the seventh trumpet sounds. Now, I understand Christ reigning. He's at his Father's right hands now. He's reigning over his elect, though. He's not reigning over the nations. For instance, Christ isn't reigning over communist China, okay? The Chinese president or Chinese dictator, I forgot his name, he's the one that's reigning. Right? Christ isn't reigning over America. Our president, our national leaders, they're reigning over America. Now, I understand he has providence. He's been given, he's been made head over all things to the church for the purpose of gathering his elect, for the purpose of gathering the co-rulers of the coming kingdom. I understand that, but it's not this kind of kingdom where Christ is executing judgment and justice in the earth. It's just not happening. We'll move to one of Martin's emails in just a moment. I just want to show you something out of Revelation chapter 13. Because the same language is used in Revelation 13 as is used in Daniel chapter 7. It's talking about, here we go. Here again, we see this beast. And it's a composite beast. Remember, I talked about the composite nature of the statue, how everything's reunited at the time of the end. Well, Daniel saw things successively, but he also saw the composite nature. And so it's the same thing with the beasts. The beasts are successive and composite as well. And so it says in verse 2, and the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth is the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So he had 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. And so, let's see. And it says in verse 7, and it was given unto him to make war with the saints. There we go again. How the little horn, he's making war against the saints and to overcome them. And power was given him over all kindreds and tongues and nations. And then, of course, it talks about the other beast, and we won't get into that. But again, this sounds awfully like the book of Daniel, doesn't it? And so this is still future. I guess this is still future to Martin and Jeff. But they're saying that the stone came and hit the image on the 10 toes. They're saying that happened during Christ's ministry. That happened in the day of Pentecost. That doesn't make sense. They would have to discorrelate the book of Daniel from the book of Revelation in order to hold that view. And that's kind of the view that Sam Frost holds. Sam Frost will swear up and down that the book of Revelation has nothing to do with the book of Daniel. He'll swear up and down that Matthew chapter 24 doesn't have anything to do with the book of Daniel. Even where Christ says, when you therefore see the abomination of desolation spoken by Daniel the prophet, whoso readeth, let him understand. He'll say that's got nothing to do with Daniel's prophecy. And I don't want to misrepresent him, but we've had discussions about this before, and he has discorrelated those verses. So here we go. So it says in Revelation chapter 17, verse 12, it says, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet. So, So guess what? That means when John wrote the Apocalypse, those 10 toes, they hadn't come into formation yet. Those 10 kings, they hadn't received any kingdom as yet. They received power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. So if the 10 kings hadn't received their power Okay, when John wrote the Apocalypse, ladies and gentlemen, that means that the little horn was still future as well, because the little horn comes after the 10 kings. That means that the little rock, well, Martin calls it a little rock, that means that the stone cut out without hands did not smite the image on its feet. That didn't happen in the first century. That didn't happen on the day of Pentecost. That didn't happen in Christ's earthly ministry. Now, the earliest you could say that happened, if you're a preterist, would be late first century, AD 66 to AD 70. But then there's problems with that view. We don't have time to go through all the problems. What I want to point out is that we all know that the beast is functioning for 42 months, for a times and a half. And so, this totally demolishes Martin and Jeff's amillennial view, because their view of the kingdom is that this has been taking place, I guess, for the last 2,000 years, that this isn't an end time event, that this is something that's been happening gradually for the last 2,000 years. And that's a ridiculous that's just simply a ridiculous interpretation to hold. You can't hold that view because, again, John said that the kings weren't reigning. He said they had received no kingdom as yet. Again, because this is something that happens suddenly, because, again, this is something that, you have to have this smash up first before the kingdom can be given to the saints. And that's exactly what John's saying in the book of Revelation, because he says that at this battle of Armageddon, it says the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet that wrought miracles before him, with which he deceived them that had received the mark of the beast, and them that worshipped his image. These were both cast alive into a lake of burning fire and brimstone. The remnant were slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse, which sword proceeded out of his mouth, and all the fowls were filled with their flesh. And then what do you get in chapter 20? That's when the angel comes down with the key of the bottomless pit, lays hold on the dragon, that old serpent, binds him for 1,000 years. And it says, then I saw thrones, and they that sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands, and they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years. So this is when the kingdom is being given to the saints of the Most High. It's after this beast is destroyed and given to the burning flame. Daniel says so. And so you can't, again, this view that, the kingdom is this little stone that just pecks the statue on the toes, and then just grows into this big mountain. It takes 2,000 years is total eisegesis. It's reading eisegetical, it's reading amillennial doctrine, amillennial kingdom doctrine into Daniel's prophecy and into John's prophecy as well. So having said that, now let's go to, let's see. So we've been doing this for about 46 minutes. So last 10 minutes or so, I'm gonna devote to one of Martin's emails, because he sends a lot of emails. And what I want to do, I think, here we go. Okay, so he sent this email out, and I just want to quickly. Okay, good. So he sent this email out, and it's the subject, the title of the email is "Reasons Why the Millennium is Not 1,000 Years After the Parousia." And let me go back. I just lost it. Hold on. Okay, good. Okay. Reasons why the millennium is not 1,000 years after the parousia of Christ. So apparently somebody wrote in, or he copied someone else's comment. Somebody's saying there's a, let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. Okay, good. Okay, so somebody's writing to Martin and they're saying that, let's see, it's a little too big. Okay, somebody's writing to Martin and they're saying that there's a period of 1,000 years after the resurrection of all the righteous to be raptured, translated, and glorified until the resurrection and condemnation of all the wicked. From this assertion, it's clear that Miss Kelly, I guess that's the person who wrote in, believes with so many other pre-mills that the millennium of Revelation 20 follows after the parousia of Christ, which is his descent from heaven to raise all the dead in Christ, change all the living saints, and glorify them. The millennium will occur after the parousia and resurrection of the saints. It will be a period of 1,000 years, which she also believes to be literal. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to read the Bible in its grammatical, historical, contextual sense. Then he says the resurrection of the unjust and their eternal condemnation, together with all the living unjust, will be 1,000 years after the resurrection and change of all the righteous. Hence, the physical resurrection of the saints and that of the unjust will be separated by 1,000 years. Then he goes on to say, this means that when death is abolished as the last enemy to end Christ's reign at the right hand. So see, he's inserting this in here, to end Christ's reign at the right hand, which was to be until he abolish all his enemies. Let's see. Will be 1,000 years after the parousia. Thus, according to Miss Kelly, Christ's reign at the right hand until all his enemies are abolished will begin after the parousia. Now, see, that's not what. Now, there may be dispensationalists who believe that Christ's reign, and I don't understand why he's phrasing this way. He said, thus, according to Miss Kelly, Christ's reign at the right hand until all his enemies are abolished will be after the parousia. So what he's doing is he's loading this statement because he's assuming that Christ is going to be his reign. First of all, that he's reigning in its full sense now, right? And secondly, that this reign is going to take place at the right hands of the Father, in that when the reign at the right hands of the Father stops, all the enemies will be subdued. Well, we know that when Christ, we know from Psalm, 110. Oh, wait a minute, I gotta find that. Let me just quickly, because I don't want to give the wrong scripture verses. Yeah, Psalm 110. The Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Now, it doesn't say anything about, sit at my right hand until I destroy every single enemy. It just says until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Now, footstool, that doesn't necessarily mean, that everybody's going to be destroyed. It simply means that the enemies are going to be made his footstool. So he's again, he's massaging that concept into there. He's loading this statement. 5, he says, therefore the removal of death forever from the earth and the creation delivered from the curse to become the new heaven and new earth, which is without the curse, will be 1,000 years after the parousia of Christ, which is the day of redemption, according to Ms. Kelly and many pre-mills. But the problem is he's loading this statement too, because the new heaven and new earth, like if you go to Isaiah, it's not without a curse, because there's still people dying. There's still death and sin in this new heaven and new earth, which is why it has to be prior to the great white throne. In fact, this is what I've argued many times in different debates and also in different podcasts, also via articles and blogs that I've done over the years, is that because Isaiah's new heaven and new earth shows people still, building houses and having kids and planting and all of that, and people dying as well, and sin still existing, then it has to be an economy that's previous to the great white throne. So it's previous to the eternal state, but it's a lot better than what we see around us now. And so this is something that I mentioned, I think, in the Sam Frost debate, is if you read the Old Testament scriptures in their plain and obvious sense, you'll see that the prophets describe a state of human affairs, a state of life on earth, which is a lot better than it is now, but which is yet short of perfection. And so that's where you have this idea of the kingdom, of the millennial kingdom. So Martin Asare, he's loading this statement because he's reading his presuppositions into it, and he's projecting it onto whoever it is wrote a response to him or whatever. Now she may believe that, but I would be willing to wager that he's probably taking her words out of context, because he's done that to me so many times. 6, he says, the end, which is also the end of Christ's reign at the right hand until he abolishes all his enemies, with death being the last enemy abolished, will be 1,000 years after the parousia. This is in spite of the fact that the parousia is when death will be swallowed up in victory by the resurrection in change of the saints. So there again, he's assuming that death is going to be eradicated at the second coming, when it simply says that the saints will be, it says that they who are Christ's will be raised in the parousia. It doesn't say anything about the wicked dead. And I believe it says, in this mountain, he will swallow up death. So it's again, Revelation 21, Revelation 22, we can't get into those. We know that there are people going to be outside the city. There's going to be people in the city who are redeemed. There's going to be people outside the city who are still unredeemed. I mean, if you're going to make this the eternal state, then you have to argue that the sin and death still exist in the eternal state throughout eternity. There's no way around that, which is, again, why full preterism gets such a boost from this view, because they hold that the Great White Throne Judgment happened in AD 70, and then what we have now is exactly what Isaiah is describing, of course, in a highly spiritualized, highly allegorized sense. But death is still in existence. Sin is still in existence. People are still building houses. People still, Revelation 21, 22, the nations still need healing, etc., etc. Their system is actually a lot more logical and a lot more coherent than Martin's and Jeff's, because Martin and Jeff, they have to allegorize and spiritualize not only the language of prophetic revelation, but they have to do that same thing to the time texts and to statements of imminency and to notes of time and marks of time, things like the 42 months. I mean, I can imagine that, if I were to bring that up to them, they would probably tell me that the 42 months is, the entire Christian dispensation. I can imagine that. I don't know if they would or not, but that's a typical view that amillennialists hold, is everything is elastic. Everything connected to the end is elastic. So they make the last days are elastic, the ends of the ages are elastic, the 42 months are elastic. Everything is elastic. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. 1,000 years are elastic. Everything's elastic. But the scriptures, if you read the scriptures in their plain and natural sense, you'll see that there's no elasticity. Now is our salvation nearer than when we first believed. This compresses it into the lifetime of those to whom Paul was speaking. Now is our salvation nearer than when we first believed. And it doesn't mean 2,000 years unless you think that, first century Romans are still alive and still waiting for their redemption after 2,000 years. It just doesn't work. So let's see. So here we go. So he says, however, all these are these assertions and their necessary logical conclusions consistent with the explicit teaching of the Bible? The answer is no, and here is why. And then he cites a bunch of texts. All teach that Christ reigned at the right hand in the presence of all his enemies. Now look at that. Christ's reign, I'm going to highlight this. Christ's reign at the right hand in the presence of all his enemies. So Christ is reigning at the Father's right hand, according to Martin Asare, right now, but he's in the presence of his enemies. Can you believe that? So Christ has enemies in heaven. He's reigning in the presence of his enemies until he abolish all of them, began in his ascension. So, okay, for this reason, Christ reigns at the right hand in this age. Well, see, this is the thing. Martin Asare is assuming that the reign is that the session at the right hands of the Father is all there is to Jesus Christ's reign. Now, I don't want to go back and beat a dead horse and start talking about Daniel 7 or Revelation 13, Revelation 19, Revelation 20. I don't want to talk about all those texts again, but it's obvious that there's two phases of Christ's reign. There's a reign when he's during the time when he's seated at his Father's right hand, a time when he's reigning over his elect, when he's reigning over his saints. He's gathering the building materials, right, of the bride. He's gathering the co-rulers and the co-reigners of the coming kingdom. But then when he comes to earth, it doesn't end like that. It's not like, boom, you go from time into eternity with the flip of a switch. It's like at that time, that's when the kingdoms of the world are broken up. And the world's kingdoms are replaced with Jesus Christ's kingdom. That's the reason why the seventh trumpet and understanding the seventh trumpet is so important, because it's at that point when the kingdoms of this world become the kingdoms of Jesus Christ. And the saints participate with Christ in reigning over all the nations of the earth. So if you watch the video I did the other night, in response to Scott Clem, I said, well, the one thing that, the kingdom, to understand the kingdom, you have to go back to the Old Testament, because whatever it was that was lost by Adam during his fall, whatever that ruin was that he brought upon the human race, is what the second Adam was called to repair, right? So you have that phrase, times of restitution. And one of the things, it wasn't just sonship that was lost by the fall. It wasn't just sonship. It was human government. It was divine righteous government in the earth. And this is something that, again, I don't want to go down that rabbit trail, but this is something that we've never, in all the years of church history, in the past 2,000 years, mankind, Christians, okay, not just mankind, but Christian mankind, has never perfected the art of human government. There's always been some corruption. There's always been some deficit. There's always been some imperfection. And it's because we have traces of indwelling sin, because we can't administer human government because we're still sinful creatures. We can do it, okay, but it's human government. You see, it's not the government. It's not perfect. It's not the perfection of righteous government. And one of the things that God ordained was government. God ordained government. And so having a righteous king that will reign in the earth is very important. It says in Jeremiah, I think it's chapter 23. I think there may be in 33 as well. He says, because the prophecy is repeated twice in the book of Jeremiah. He says in Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 5, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will raise unto David a righteous branch, and a king shall reign and prosper, and shall execute judgment and justice in the earth. Verse 6, in his days Judah shall be saved, and Israel shall dwell safely. And this is his name, whereby he shall be called the Lord our righteousness. Now, Martin, because he's claiming that the kingdom is, all the kingdom is Christ sitting at the Father's right hand, he has to spiritualize those passages. And that's what amillennialists do. They spiritualize all of the passages that talk about earthly sovereignty. They spiritualize all of those passages. And so that's what Martin's doing, which is essentially it's eisegesis, because it's reading Christ's ascension kingdom into the kingdom that takes place when he reigns on earth, after the little horn is destroyed, after the stone hits the feet of the image, after the beast and the false prophet are cast into the lake of fire. And this is after the 42 months, which haven't taken place yet. So he goes on and on. The reign of Christ, which will end. Says the reign of Christ. Let's see. The reign of Christ. See, I lost my place. Which will end. when death is abolished as the last enemy, as this very reign of Christ at the right hand of the presence of his enemies. See, he keeps saying that it's at the right hand in the presence of his enemies. His enemies are all down here. That's what I pointed out in the recent response I did to William Bell. He says, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies thy footstool. Rule thou in the midst of thine enemies. The enemies are all down here. He doesn't have any enemies up there. Now, I personally believe that Satan had access to heaven prior to the ascension of Christ, but at the ascension of Christ, Satan was kicked down to the first heaven. So he's the prince of the power of the air. And then when Christ returns during the parousia, Christ's going to come down to the first heaven, and that's when Satan's going to be kicked out of the first heaven. And that's why in Revelation chapter 12, you have this great battle taking place where, once these thrones are set and the Ancient of Days sits and this 42 months begin, that's when Satan will be kicked out of the first heaven. And then he will fall to earth. And that's when all hell will break loose. That's when there will all be all kinds of persecutions and tribulations. That's really the Great Tribulation. That's what most of the book of Revelation is about. It's the same thing that Daniel wrote about. It's not two different things. So he keeps going on, and this is another example of his lengthy email correspondence. And I just don't have time. This would take me like 2 hours literally to go through this. But he's missing the point. Number one, he's missing the point about the kingdom having two phases. There's a spiritual phase, which we enter into now. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt that Christ has a spiritual kingdom, but it's ruling and reigning over his elect. And then when he comes back at the parousia, the first thing that gets judged is the house of God. He's got to purge his kingdom. So he's got to separate the wheat from the tares. And there's going to be certain people who aren't going to like it very much because they're living in sin or they made a false profession. Like an old minister once told me, professors versus possessors is one of the most salient themes in Jesus Christ's teachings. He's constantly bringing out this distinction between professors and possessors. It's not talking about, Christians versus the rest of the world. He's talking about professors and possessors. And so, again, you can believe it or you don't have to believe it, but there will be a 1,000-year reign. Anyways, I'm starting to get a little bit hoarse now, so I think I'm going to end this. But this has been a good session. This has been about an hour and 5 minutes, and so I'm going to end it on that note. But again, I have nothing personal against Jeff or Martin. But again, they need to start producing content. They need to be more professional. And, they shouldn't be running to other channels to respond. I mean, of course, they have a right to do that. But, the people that they're running to, there's people that are bad mouthing me right now and that are saying really basically trash talking me and that are also trolling all of my debates that I do on other channels on other channel on Donnie Badinsky's channel. They'll show up for every debate in the live comments and they'll trash talk me. And this is bringing something very personal because all of the disagreement that I've had with people over these issues has all been doctrinal. And so I will say this, that Martin and Jeff, both of them, Martin more particularly than Jeff, both of them have leveled accusations against me. Now, I have not leveled a single personal accusation against either of these men the whole time we've been doing business. So the whole time they've been in my email feed, the whole time, every time that we've had discussions over here, they participated in panel discussions. They participated in, larger than live videos. And not once did I ever make any kind of personal accusation against either of them. But because they choose to hang out with people who gossip, who basically don't have a job, I guess, and it's just all they do all day is want to gossip and talk about other people because they want to hang around with those people. They're listening to the hype. They're listening to the stuff. So again, man, I'm not, I don't have a personal problem with anybody. This is all doctrinal. This is all related to Jesus Christ and his doctrine in the proper method of New Testament exegesis. So if you can't handle conflict, if you can't handle doctrinal conflict and you want to make it personal, ultimately that's going to be on you. It's not going to be on me, because I go to bed with a clean conscience every night. I don't have any enemies. These people aren't my enemies. They're their own enemies because they don't know how to handle conflict. So anyways, again, thanks again for tuning in. Try to be back in a few days. In the meantime, I'll try to produce some more shorts, probably produce some more clips. But thanks again for tuning in. Have a blessed rest of your week, and I'll see you soon.